Hello, and welcome to either week 53 or week one of year two. I think we're going to call this week 53 because what I think I want to do is start over in January for the new year and call that week one. So, week 53, hey. And it is Sense and Sensibility by Jane Austen. Now, some of my background. I did my PhD work in Michigan on Jane Austen, and my focus was home in Austen. Now, as a matter of fact, in working on that, I never really got to the point where I detailed which novel I was going to be focusing on or which scenes I was going to be focusing on. Um, it could have been anyone in all of them, but definitely could have been Sense and Sensibility. Now, this is her first published novel. She had four novels published in her lifetime, and then two published posthumously. Persuasion, her last written novel, and Northanger Abbey were her actual first written novel, but not first published. Um, So, Sense and Sensibility, Pride and Prejudice, Mansfield Park, and Emma are the four novels that were published during her lifetime in that order. Um, and what can we say about Austen? Well, they're first of all, Austen is known for her marriage plots. Her novels are full of young women who seek fulfillment of their lives through marriage. Now, the reason for this was, and it's explicit both in the history of the Regency period when she was writing and when her novels are set, and in her novels themselves, as women had basically no prospects outside of getting married. It is possible they could be, they could inherit money from their father or from a relative who passed away, but unless a will specifically set them up that way, the property would pass to the son or a male relative of some kind. And many times, wills were specifically set up so that the money did not pass to the women. Men were, I guess, socially and theoretically supposed to take care of women in their lives, unmarried sisters, daughters, widowed mothers, and other such women who were not attached to a specific man. But doing so wasn't always what men wanted to do because this cut into their ability to live the lifestyle they wanted to live or have the financial security and wealth that they wanted, perhaps to speculate on the market or buy property or just, live a life. So, this was a major concern of Austen, is that her women needed to find a man who would take care of them financially, who was not a complete ass, and who they had some kind of attraction to. So these are the three things on which her women look for. So invariably, these women judge men who use women and abuse women very harshly. So they're looking for good treatment. They are, of course, attracted to physical characteristics of a man, and money does matter. But the different women have different concepts of how much money is necessary. Like even in this book is about the Dashwood sisters, Elinor and Marianne. Elinor is typically taken to represent sense, and Marianne is taken to represent sensibility. Sense is basically logic, reasoning, emotional detachment, and sensibility is the opposite. It is emotion. It is, in this case, even a romantic, both in the R and big R, small r and big R sense of overflowing of emotions. So Marianne responds to everything in a very emotional way, and Elinor, at least for the majority of this book, appears to approach everything with a very logical, emotionally detached way. Now, the reason why I say that is this book is very much about both sisters having both qualities, but one of them is indulging their sensibility and the other one is repressing it. That's really what is going on here in terms of that, because as we do find out, Eleanor feels very, very deeply. But because she believes very strongly in propriety and in the duty that she owes to her family, to her name, to herself, to society, she is not willing to indulge those emotions. Marianne, on the other hand, throws caution to the wind and doesn't care. Now, given all these things I'm talking about, a woman has to enter the marriage market because she can't have a job. She has to be taken care of by a man, which means that she has to remain uh, marketable to a man, which means this is where the idea of a ruined or fallen woman comes from in this time period, in terms of a woman who is too sexually free, or who is known to have premarital lovers, or who is pregnant. Now, the pregnancy is not necessary for the fallen woman, but that's usually in fallen woman stories the thing that happens is usually they fall and get pregnant and they get abandoned by society, and they usually either die in childbirth or shortly thereafter, or sometimes before, and etc. Now, Austen is not writing that story. She's writing the romance plot where women avoid the pitfalls and find a good man and get married. That said, on the margins of her novels, there are almost always these so called fallen women. And there's a bit of a potential morality kind of cautionary tale there. And Austen often has a character like Marianne here who flirts with disaster. She has a too intense and too emotionally charged attachment to a character here, a male character, Willoughby, who turns out has, in fact, a past where he has, quote, ruined a woman. Now, the reason why, I mean, this is clearly a very sexist and patriarchal point of view here, but it is true that Willoughby suffers nearly nothing when this originally happens, and the woman basically becomes shunned, gets kicked out of society, and dies an awful death, etc. But Willoughby goes on in the same lifestyle he's used to. And it's not until later, when his problem is discovered, that he is disinherited. But that is a financial issue that he takes care of by marrying a wealthy woman. And that takes care of his wealth problem. And so men do suffer brief social opprobrium or financial distress, but they're not destroyed by this. Women invariably are destroyed by this in society. Now, that's another thing that has to be mentioned, is in the society that Austen was writing about, you have the nobility. Okay, forget about them. They're not really a part of this story. The nobility exist, but they don't really figure. Under the nobility, you have what would be called the upper middle class, the rich, the sort of well-to-do. That's the class Austen writes about. Okay, and that's the class that women are theoretically going to get kicked out of if they misbehave. This class, now all women, all the way up and down, aren't supposed to work, but these women specifically do not work, and these men, for the most part, don't work to make money. If they work more for the passage of time more than they do for the making of money. So the mercantile people are slightly below this still. So anybody who has worked to make their money, they're accepted in the lower realm of this world, but they're looked down upon because, it's old money and new money kind of stuff, So all of these old money people, basically, but not nobility. And then under this is the almost in Austen completely invisible working class. And even in this time period, there would have been some slavery, and they are almost completely invisible. The only way we see them is on occasion we get a maid or a woman who works in the houses who is mentioned. Now, these are the only kinds of jobs that women could have. So women couldn't have jobs, and that's true for the most part. But these working class women were able to get stations where they did things like this. But there, what would happen is if they were caught messing around or getting pregnant or being too loose in their morals, maybe even drinking too much, they could lose that position and garner a bad reputation, and then they couldn't work anywhere. Okay, so this is the kind of thing that would happen to women, is they're very constrained in their behavior, and men were mostly unconstrained. So, a man and a woman going someplace alone, if the man decided uh, to attack her, there was very little she could do because she would be fallen whether she consented or not. She would be fallen whether she approved of this or not. And so this is where propriety comes in. A woman in this time period would try not to ever be alone with a man who was not her direct relative because it was socially dangerous. Even if nothing happened, rumors could arise, and those rumors could be just as deadly as the reality. So I know that's a lot of background, but this is the kind of world and reality that these women lived in. And these are the people that Austen is mostly concerned with. In it varies in Austen novels how developed the men are, but the women are almost universally very developed and very full characters. It is clearly the part of society that she knew from her own life and that she identified with and that she wrote about. Everything is seen from this marriage plot lens as well. That is the drama. Men go off and do war and things like that, and go off and do business and whatnot, and blah blah blah. None of that matters. That is literally like a character walking off the stage and then coming back into the stage. That may figure as a thing that makes them attractive or unattractive, but it is not a direct plot point. What the plot points are is how they treat the women around them and that kind of thing. Okay, so what do we have here? All right, this story is about a family, the Dashwoods, where the father has died and there are three daughters. Elinor is the oldest, the Marianne is the second, and then there's a third one, Margaret. Margaret is, I think, 13, and Margaret only figures in this novel as sort of a short picture of how a woman starts to come into society. She is not what's called out, which means she's not in society yet, but she watches her older sisters and watches her mother, and she is imbibing the social roles, and she's imbibing how a woman should act in this society from her sisters. And she shares with Marianne and with Mrs. Dashwood, the mother, an overboard of sensibility. Elinor is the only one with the quote sense. Now, Elinor, I think, is 19 or 20 when the book begins, and Marianne, I think, is 17. I'm not sure what the quote age of consent is, but Marianne is seen as a marriable age at this age. So I don't know for certain about how much uh, freedom she had, whether she could enter contracts and that kind of thing. I can just tell you that she was seen as a marriageable age. So she was out to society. Elinor was out to society. Um, okay, so the husband dies, and the family has this was the man's second family. He had a first family where the wife had died, and he had a son. He gives all of the money to that son. And he tells his son to take care of his new wife and daughters. But this son, John, has a new baby with his wife, and they convince themselves in the first couple pages that what was meant by taking care of his sisters was basically to do nothing unless they absolutely needed it. And so that's exactly what he does. He gives them absolutely nothing and justifies and rationalizes this. And like I said, this is one of the places where Austen clearly is commenting on this lack of financial security that these women had. Okay, so the novel progresses, and what happens is Elinor has had an attachment to a relative, like a cousin, I think, Edward Ferrars, and it's not been spoken. They're not engaged, but they're talking. And she thinks they have an attachment that might eventually lead to marriage. But she is cautious, like I said. She is sensible. She represses her emotions. And so she acts with it very logically. Marianne has no prospects at the moment, but when they move to the new cottage where they live, and in my dissertation, this is one of the things I would have focused on, is the sense of home that these women have and the sense of home these women make. Because in this period, a woman always stayed close to home. And so what a home was very important for her, and that is why that was a focus I was going to have. What does a home mean to a woman in this period? What is it that she's looking for? Obviously, we know things like comfort, we know things like familiarity, we know things like, being at ease and things of that nature. But I was also interested in the specific details of this because Austen does go into specific details about what the rooms are like, how they're situated, where the windows are, and this kind of thing. Now, she doesn't provide blueprints, so, it's not that detailed, but she does talk about these things. And in most of her books, the female characters are very interested in the home that they will be moving into if they become the husband of a man, uh, as to what their prospects will be. So what the home was not just an abstract ideal for them. It was a very much a lived reality. And, you know, that's basically the sort of thing I would have been looking at. Yeah. So Marianne meets this gentleman, Willoughby. Now, Willoughby is cute, Willoughby is rich, Willoughby is very personable, he's charming, and this sort of thing. He's everything Marianne's looking for. And as she embodies sensibility, this is her first love, her first attachment. And of course, that is immediately very affecting and very important to her, her first love. And she doesn't believe in second attachments. All right. So we go along for a while, and Marianne and Willoughby do their flirtatious thing. Um, and then the Miss Steeles come into the story. That's Lucy and either Anne or Nancy Steele. But Lucy Steele is the important one because Lucy Steele, as it turns out, is engaged to Edward Ferrars. And it's kind of implied that she is aware of Elinor and Edward's attachment as well. And so she deliberately plays against that. And there's a lot of sort of uh, mean girl kind of implied hostility between the two of them in conversations, which is actually kind of a bit fun. Anyway, Willoughby, it turns out, is not a good guy. He has in the past uh, taken a woman and gotten her pregnant and abandoned her, like I said, and she was ruined and he moved on and nothing happened to him immediately. But during the time when he is, macking on Marianne, I guess, trying to hook up with Marianne, they don't, by the way, apparently. Um, uh, During this period, he becomes embarrassed by his past and is cut off from his inheritance. And remember, Marianne and Elinor Dashwood, they don't have a lot of money. So, they're going to have to marry up in order to remain in this society. Um, Willoughby cuts Marianne off and winds up marrying some rich woman. And this, of course, breaks Marianne's heart. She suffers from all kinds of depressive episodes. She breaks out into tears and runs around crying and this kind of thing. I'm not going to go into the specific details of all of that. And meanwhile, Elinor has found out that Edward has this previous attachment. He's been engaged to Lucy for 4 years, and that predates any time that he had any attachment to her. But she says nothing. Anyway, as the thing progresses, Marianne gets over her disappointment with Willoughby, and an older gentleman who had hung out and been their friend and been around the entire time eventually becomes attached to her. And Lucy, as it turns out, wasn't really that interested in Edward apparently, but just wanted the social mobility that marrying Edward Ferrars would have given her because she's also a relatively unpropertied woman. So when Edwards is cut off on his finances because of Lucy, and all of his money is given to his younger brother Robert, all of his inheritance given to his younger brother Robert, Lucy forms an attachment with Robert, and they run off and elope and get married. And Edward is now free for Eleanor. And there's this great scene where Eleanor learns this, and she has accepted the fact that she is going to be unhappy for the rest of her life, that she's not going to get Edward her love, and she's not going to have a successful life. And then she finds out she will, and she runs out of the room crying, and it's heartbreaking. It's one of those scenes where that Austen is just an absolute mistress of, in terms of this emotional baggage that Eleanor has been carrying. And we have seen it, but no one else has. And Marianne understands how deeply Eleanor has been affected at some point. She's like, and she hates herself for being so selfish and depending upon Eleanor for support when she wasn't there for Eleanor. Okay. And then Mr. Brandon, the older gentleman who Marianne eventually does get married to, he gives Edward, who wants to go into the clergy, a post as a clergyman on his property, and this will be sufficient for Eleanor and Edward because she is not as financially ambitious, um, and so everything ends nice and happily, except for Willoughby, who is now disappointed and married to a woman that he apparently doesn't care for. But strangely enough, Austen goes on to write a bit more about Willoughby, and it turns out that he gets sort of re-inherited a little bit. He gets some of his position back from his family over time. They come to accept his new family, as does Robert and Lucy. They get more accepted by Miss Ferrars. So everything turns out well for everybody, and Marianne has a man who is good for her, and Eleanor has a man who's good for her. The marriage between Marianne and Brandon doesn't actually happen in the book, but shortly after, basically. Anyway, so Sense and Sensibility. Um, it is a fascinating novel in terms of the life of these different women and the things that they have to negotiate and all the social stuff that they have to deal with. And, I'm no great judge of these things, but I would say the romantic stories are fulfilling. So that's it for week 53. Have a good one.